Michigan, a Democrat-led committee has recently approved a $175 million bid to build an electric vehicle battery plant. If we look at Texas, 30% of the energy production is now through renewables. But both states are encountering significant pushback to that.
Well, that's right, Brendan. Americans aren't against clean water and Americans aren't against clean air. There's another problem here. The problem is with the climate agenda itself and the fanatics in the United States who've been pushing it around the world, and of course, the global power that stands to most gain from it. Let's take a look at the details.
I'm Brendan Fallon.
And I'm Lee Smith.
And we're over the target. In Austin, you have a number of Republican lawmakers pushing a slate of bills that would remove the kind of concessions and incentives that have been there to encourage the use of renewable energy. And at the same time, you also have locals, like many farmers, who are adamantly against having their land used for this purpose, like for the use of solar panels and things like that.
I think that's a very good point. Whether it's ranchers, whether it's other kinds of farmers in Texas, to have all this land used for setting up wind turbines or for solar panels, it's using up important land on which you can grow things that feed the population. And so that's one problem. Also it's an eyesore. Remember that. The way that these wind turbines look on the I guess we call them a skyline now, almost like a city, except they're a blight. The other problem is we have to remember Texas got into a lot of trouble back in 2021. I believe it was February when the lights went out across Texas. And why was that? Because the wind turbines froze. Apparently, no one ever told Texas officials or the people responsible for Texas's power grid that was certainly a possibility, that overdependence on renewable energies, especially with wind turbine, that kind of thing might happen. Clearly, what we're seeing here is what's supposed to happen in the United States. The citizenry gets upset, they get angry, and officials have no choice but to respond to it. If they don't, they're out of a job. So we're seeing the system work the way it's supposed to here. And it's good for Republicans and Democrats to have this argument. This is how it's supposed to go.
And we have a similar situation in Michigan where people are also angry. We had locals object to this proposal to put $175 million into building an electric vehicle plant that would be used by the Chinese company Gotion. Despite the fervent opposition from locals, this was passed by the Democratic-led committee.
Yeah, we're seeing conflict. We're seeing drama here, right? We have large parts of the country that are against the climate agenda, and we see other parts that are trying to push it. The Democrats and the state legislature in Michigan are clearly trying to push it. You can understand why it's important for certain politicians to push these ideas, because they'll say, well, look, we're bringing jobs to the state. Isn't that a good thing? And the response that people have to that, the people who are protesting against, are saying, yeah, of course we want jobs. We want our state to be prosperous. But here's what we don't want. We're very concerned about what the Chinese Communist Party was doing here in our state. We don't want them buying our land. We've seen them buying up land all over the country. We don't want them buying up land here because we think that's dangerous. Also, we don't want to start putting money in their pockets. We're not a slave population. Why are we working for the Chinese Communist Party? So while jobs are good, the character and nature of those jobs are raising lots of questions for people around the country. And again, that's exactly what we want. This is the way political debates are supposed to happen, rather than just having agenda imposed on Americans.
Getting back to Texas, Lee, going back about 13 years when then Governor Rick Perry was touting the idea of diversifying the state's electricity provision, he compared it to the sparking of Texas's petroleum industry going back to the early 1900s. So it looked like this was going to be the dawn of something really amazing and something that was going to be highly beneficial to Texas. Why does Texas find itself in the situation that it's in now?
Well, as we said, Texas has seen serious problems with its power grid very recently. And look, the other thing, when a Texas lawmaker, when a Texas official starts comparing it to just like the big Texas oil boom, he's trying to get a whole bunch of people on his side. And even if his comparison is not exactly accurate, and he's spreading a lot of horse manure around those oil fields, Look, oil is a very different thing than what's happening with the climate change infrastructure.
What is the issue with the climate change agenda? I mean, the average person doesn't want the environment polluted. We all want a clean environment for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren. So what is the tension here?
This isn't your standard American environmentalist movement or the conservationist movement. Let's remember that conservationism has a very, very old history in the United States. It's part of the fabric of the country, and it totally makes sense when you think about it, right? This is a beautiful and bounteous country, and people wanted to protect it. And foremost among them are, of course, farmers who rely on the land. So the idea that somehow farmers are predators is preposterous, because that's how they make their living, from the land. That's part of their family inheritance, the land. But speaking about the conservationist movement, let's just think about the real highlight of that as President Teddy Roosevelt and the national parks. This really sort of institutionalized the American conservationist movement, how important nature was, how much this meant to Americans, how much this was a part of our country, that we needed to protect wild animals as well. So the conservationist movement is not just about land and air, it's also about animals, right? This is a very important thing. Everything from bears, Smokey the Bear, how to take care of animals, preserve our wildlife. Look at all the great writers on American conservationism, from Aldo Leopold to Wendell Berry. It's a very, very central thing to our identity as Americans. As you said, Brendan, there are no Americans who are arguing for dirty water or dirty air. What's happened, though, is they've recognized that with the climate change agenda, there's something very different going on here. It's not about conservationism. It's not about environmentalism.
I think there are a number of jarring contradictions in terms of the climate agenda. For one, the fact that we may be reducing the amount of fossil fuel-based production, manufacturing that happens in the US, but often it's being offshored to somewhere like China, where they're relying on fossil fuels, and they're doing it in a much dirtier way than it would actually be done in the US. There's actually more pollution being generated.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not hard to do the math. When the Chinese are building, what is it, 6 new coal plants a week, something like that, and at the end it's more than the rest of the world combined. So, I mean, anyone can do the math. You don't have to be Einstein to put it together and figure out what's happening. We keep paying the Chinese Communist Party for climate change infrastructure, and what are they doing with that money? They are buying more oil from the Saudis, and they're building coal plants. So how is this helping the environment? When you really get to the bottom of it, you look and you see this isn't actually about the environment at all. When we talk about emissions, when we talk about who's being saved and who's being helped, it's not animals and it's not mankind either. When you look at the wind farms, when you look at the solar farms and the different ecosystems that destroys, how is this helping God's creatures on planet Earth? As it turns out, it's not even designed to help mankind.
I mean, to be a child and to be given this idea that the world is very likely going to end within a decade because the environment is headed for catastrophe and we need to take drastic action. We need to eat insects, for example, if we've got any chance of surviving. What does that put in a child's mind, for example? What does it put in anyone's mind? This is our future. We need to eat insects.
It's pretty dark, and you would have a lot of people, including myself, who are wondering, really, that's the future of mankind? So everything is going to be really bad, so we have to tear up our landscape and stick big wind turbines up there that cull birds? And now we have to eat bugs? I don't know. Does that kind of life sound worth living to a lot of people? There's certainly not a lot of joy in that. One of the great joys in human life is to share a meal with friends and family, to sit across from them, ask about your day, praise God for the bounty in front of you, right? Having to eat meals of insects changes the entire thing. This is what I mean when I'm saying, what is the point of the climate agenda? If the picture of humanity it describes is a picture that most people reject, right? This is the actual, the precise opposite of the vision provided in the book of Genesis and the Garden of Eden, right? And this is what lots of Americans have compared our country to since the country was founded. All of the strange new animals, all of the strange new plants, all of the strange and wondrous things. The climate agenda isn't about preserving any of these things as we see. The climate agenda is about something else entirely.
Certainly, the reality where we're eating insects, this is something that happens after when we've hit the post-apocalyptic state of the world, or this is the dystopian future. It's not something you expect to be happening at this point. And it does bespeak a certain type of psychopathy. It's fanaticism. Fanaticism and psychopathy is okay if it's in people who don't have a lot of influence and control over the way that the country or the society heads. But we're often seeing this with people who have a lot of that kind of control, people who are basically running the country to a large degree.
No, you're right, Brendan. That's a very good way to put it. I mean, it's okay, fanaticism and wearing signs around your neck saying the world is coming to an end. It's okay if you're a guy in Times Square, wandering around and shouting at people about the world coming to an end. Say, here, eat bugs, eat the bugs, eat the bugs. But when it's coming from senior U.S. officials, when it's coming from, I believe, one of the people you must have been referring to is Biden administration climate czar, John Kerry. We have to understand that this is also another current that runs through the mainstream of American history. There's this reverence on one hand for our natural splendor, for our bounty, but there's also a current of fanaticism, millenarians, people who say the world is coming to an end, people who threaten all the time the dystopian future. And John Kerry and most of the climate change operatives, I guess we'd call them, most of them pushing this agenda are part of that current of American life. That's why it's very important to disentangle these two things, genuine conservationism, genuine environmentalism, from these lunatics who are pushing initiatives, as John Kerry has most recently, talking about, we're going to have to get rid of agriculture. We're going to have to get rid of farming. What's the upside, Brendan? As you and I have been discussing, that kind of nuttiness gets the attention of the American people. When you say, we're going to have to get rid of farming, families around the country start to wonder, these aren't just people who have farms, but people who eat dinner and breakfast and lunch, and may indulge in a snack every once in a while too. They wonder, where is our nourishment supposed to come from if fanatics like John Kerry want to stop farming? That's part of what's inspired this great citizens' pushback against the climate agenda.
The American population has been pretty accommodating of efforts, purportedly efforts to make the world a cleaner place. People are willingly put solar panels on their roofs. People are investing in cars that are more economical, more efficient. People are willing to take steps to preserve the environment. But when you reach that level of fanaticism, anyone is going to start asking questions about it. And we saw this, one example of this is in the Netherlands, probably what we've seen the largest attack on the farming industry. And this was last year. This led to a major standoff between farmers and the authorities. What exactly was going on there, Lee?
Well, Brendan, I just want to come back and say the point you made about people putting solar panels on their home is a great point. And the car industry, because U.S. officials have forced them to, they've gotten not only more efficient, but cleaner energy. Natural gas is cleaner energy. So I think that's such a crucial point. And it proves what we've been saying. People don't want dirty water. They don't want dirty air. And Americans are keen to pitch in and do their part, even if that includes spending hours recycling. When our garbage, our refuse is picked up, people aren't actually recycling them in the way that we thought they would be. So that's the key point, that people want to help. People want to pitch in. But once it goes too far, once it gets to a place where it's gotten in the Netherlands, as you said, and people are starting to fight back. People are understanding there's something else going on here. It's a combination of fanaticism, as we've discussed. There's also a great deal of money at stake, and people who have invested in climate agenda infrastructure. And there's something else that we touched on lightly too, Brendan, and that's the role of the Chinese Communist Party in the manufacture of so much of this infrastructure.
Often when we're seeing this kind of unexplainable, irrational political phenomena, there is a Chinese Communist Party factor involved. And I think this has certainly been the case with the solar panel industry here in America. Recently, the Biden administration vetoed a bipartisan effort to have the tariffs Chinese-made solar panels restored. If this is about creating this infrastructure cleanly and in a way that respects human dignity, why did this happen?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. With every choice that we make as Americans, as human beings, you have to weigh the costs, right? And if what the message is here is that the only way that we can have affordable solar panels in the United States is solar panels made by CCP slave labor, then that's another factor that's militating against the climate agenda. And of course, this is what's at the heart of it. Now, I think that more and more Americans are becoming aware of that as well, how a lot of Chinese-made goods are actually manufactured. It's a very big problem that Americans have lost so many manufacturing jobs over the last 2 decades as American corporate and political elites have greased the path for the CCP. But I think now Americans are starting to look and say, like, well, wow, okay, so they're relying on slave labor. This is terrible. And I think this is all part of the larger emotional sense, intellectual sense that Americans are starting to respond to regarding the climate change agenda. Remember, it's not that Americans want dirty water or want dirty air or want their land polluted. The climate change agenda is not about conservationism. It's not about environmentalism. It's about enriching the Chinese Communist Party, and it's pushed by a bunch of fanatics here in the United States like John Kerry.
I think with all these suspect factors in play, Lee, it's not surprising that many Americans are enlightening to the deeper agenda, to the climate agenda. And we're seeing the tipping point of that in Texas at the moment, where a sensible restoration of reliable and traditional energy production is taking place. And to a certain degree, renewables are being put on the back burner while stability is allowed to take effect. I'm Brendan Fallon.
And I'm Lee Smith.
And we're over the target.